Hello, and welcome to our pre-recorded Bible study for July 21st, 2024. And continuing our series on Sunday school stories we don't hear in the lectionary too often. We're looking today at the three young men from Daniel chapter 3. But to establish some context, we're going to look first at Daniel chapter 1, because that's where they're introduced. And so in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king appointed Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. All right, so what's going on here? So Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, who you heard about from Pastor Mark last week. And Jehoiakim was king of Judah from 609 to 598 BC. So if you remember last week, King Josiah dies in battle against Pharaoh Necho of Egypt. And so Josiah's first son, Jehoahaz III, is king for 3 months until the Pharaoh Necho decides to take him captive, bring him back to Egypt, and then he dies there. And then Jehoiakim's in charge from 609 to 598 because Egypt had defeated Judah, but then after Necho and the Egyptians are defeated at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, when the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar defeat them, then Judah is forced to pay tribute to the Babylonians instead of to the Egyptians. And so they're brought over the course of several centuries, several deportations. This describes over here mostly this is the deportation of earlier of the northern kingdom, but gets us some similar idea for what happens with Daniel and the three young men, that just like the Assyrians did this, then the Babylonians are doing the same thing. Conquer an area, take the royalty and intellectuals, intelligentsia, take them to Babylon, train them to be Babylonians, good Babylonians, and then use them in their government, and replace people. And so again, that's what happens here as well. All right, and so one of the things then maybe to think of as we're thinking of how do we understand what they're going through? Well, maybe one way to do it is to think of them as involuntary international students, just because we have connections with international students, with the best and brightest from other countries that come here to Ames to study. And when international students come, they often will change their names to something that's easier for Americans to pronounce. It's an American-sounding name to try and fit in. Two of my favorites are Chandler, who's from Taiwan, who used Chandler as his American name because that's the character Chandler from Friends. And then Wei Hua worked in our office for a bit with doing international stuff. And her American name was Gabby from Desperate House, which she took from Desperate Housewives, which also then points out, the dangers or challenges of where they get these names and what these interpretations are. Again, if international students are coming, then their familiarity with American culture is what they see on TV. They think life in America is like Friends or Desperate Housewives or Survivor or Real Housewives or of Beverly Hills or whatever. They're coming in with different expectations, and so in some ways that's what we're doing. But again, these international students we work with, they get paid for, their government sends them here so they can learn English, learn engineering, or learn scientific knowledge, and then bring that back to their country and help train people in those things, which is sort of what Daniel and his friends are going through. And I'm hoping we'll see. I'm hoping I'm not stepping on Pastor Mark's toes too much for when he talks about Daniel and the lion's den, which is the study for next week. All right. And so, but the difference is here, so Daniel and his friends get different names, but these names, well, A, they're not choosing them, and B, they have a deeper meaning than that. And so Daniel becomes Belshazzar, and then Hananiah is the first one. His Hebrew name means Yah, or Yahweh is gracious, so God is gracious, and so the command it's changed to be Shadrach, command of Aku, possibly the moon god of the Babylonians. So Mishael, who is what Elohim, another name for God, is, whereas probably mean who is as Aku is. Azariah, Yahweh has helped, and Abednego is either slave of Nebo-Nabu or slave of God, another slave of the. So in other words, their names are changed, and their names are changed especially so that instead of honoring the Hebrew God, the one true God, Yahweh, so Yah or El, if those are in the names, that's how that's the Hebrew, an allusion to the Hebrew name for God. Whereas then their names are changed to honor Babylonian gods. So similar meaning, but then instead of the Hebrew god's name is the Babylonian gods' names are in there. So I think that's one of the things as we look at this story. It's interesting to look out and see that as they're strangers in a strange land, as they're exiles far from home, they don't have a whole lot of agency. They can't make full choices. They're war captives, enslaved, but they do object to a couple things, and it's kind of interesting to think about figuring out where they make those changes, where they make their stance. And so they're willing, though, to go along with this name change. Now, why is that? Well, in some of it, we hear them referred to by their Hebrew names most of the rest of the time in the book, except for when it's a Babylonian talking. So maybe it's, okay, we'll let the Babylonians call us by those names, but we know who we are, really. And then look at what they do object to and things, and we'll get to that here in a bit. Also, there's some speculation. Nothing's confirmed or clear in the passages, but it's possible they became eunuchs as well. Their supervisors, overseers, are often referred to as the chief of the eunuchs, and no family is mentioned. They're never mentioned as with a wife or kids. So it's an argument made more from omission than from something clear in the text. But that's a possibility, and also recognizing again, that's this. They don't have a whole lot of choice in some of these things, but also that being a eunuch was something that would have been, as Israelites, as Jews, they would have, want to keep the family line going, and there were commands in Leviticus about how eunuchs could not fully enter the temple and things, and so that would have been a big deal for them too. All right, so that's kind of our introduction to Daniel and his friends. All right, but then Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. And so he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. All right, so what's going on here? Again, they're willing to take on Babylonian names that reference Babylonian gods, but they're not willing to eat this. What's going on? So, they're doing it to keep kosher, or was what we call it kosher, but to follow the dietary laws in the Old Testament that they're supposed to follow, so because even if they were allowed to have meat, for example, they wouldn't necessarily be able to. They wouldn't necessarily know that it was meat from a clean animal, and also most definitely wouldn't have been killed in a kosher manner, and could have been mixed up with stuff. And also meat and wine were used to worship idols, and we see that here. Later in Daniel, they use wine in a party and praise the gods of all those things, and that gets Belshazzar the king in trouble. And then we see even too in the New Testament when Paul's writing to the Corinthians and dealing with the fact that they want meat. Some are eating the meat sacrificed to idols because they know the idols don't mean anything, and others are objecting because they think it still means something. So that's why they refuse to participate in these things. And so they eat vegetables, drink water, instead of all the rich food from the king, drinking all the wine, and it turns out that makes them healthier. In fact, there's even then, can go on the Daniel diet or Daniel fast. You can get a book so you can follow that and see if that helps you out. And so why do they draw the line here? Again, it's that follow their identity has changed in some ways, but the food they eat is something they can control, and they do so by being respectful. They ask the eunuch, the chief first. But he's worried about his job. He wants to make sure that if they take care of the food, that it doesn't come back to him. That then these guys aren't as healthy, and so they propose an experiment with this person with their steward, and it works, and so they're fine. All right. And then continuing on, as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. and they apply themselves to their studies, which is again one of those things too. They don't object to the fact that they're learning all this Babylonian, history, Babylonian theology, Babylonian astrology, all those sorts of things. But instead work well enough, strong enough to be able to do what they need to, and achieve well and get recognized for their achievements and get high positions in the bureaucracy and the government service. And so that sets up then what's going on in Daniel 3. Our reading for today. So King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, its breadth was 6 cubits, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And I'll skip this part, but if you want to read all the different officials and different musical instruments that are mentioned, you can go ahead. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. There, then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar answered to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall be immediately cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up. All right. And so, what do we get here? That we get that they have achieved, well, again, they're high officials in the province of Babylon, in the capital province. It's not like they got sent off to be in charge of some outlying province that some backwater, and so they're in the capital. But then they're doing well enough that these other officials are jealous of them and what they're doing, and so trying to get rid of them using this idea. Now, of course. In chapter 2 is when we get Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of a statue, and Daniel interprets it, and Nebuchadnezzar figures out that Daniel has this connection to a God that can at least interpret dreams and stuff. So you'd think he'd be a little more open than he is, but he, as we see throughout the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's kind of a slow learner. And so they learned, what did they learn? They learned that they could trust in God to be with them, even as they go through these things. And so they're able to trust that God could deliver them from the fiery furnace, could deliver them from the hand of the king in any number of ways. Could get the king to change his mind, could make it so the furnace doesn't light up, anything that way. But also recognizing that God might choose not to do that, but they'd be faithful to God anyway. All right. So then Nebuchadnezzar is filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. The footnote says it's kind of they would have used more bellows to heat it up. And so Nebuchadnezzar ordered some of his mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks and tunics, hats and other garments, and thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. Then he answered and said to them, But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. And so they get it's again so hot that the soldiers who throw them into the furnace die from the heat, and yet miraculously the 3 friends are unbound in the fire, walking around, and there's a 4th one who looks like the son of the gods, which is either an angel or Jesus, the pre-incarnate Christ, kind of how we talk about it. That it's in the same way that we see God having a God appearing with a physical body in a way like when Jacob wrestles with God and things like that. So it seems to be, Jesus with them, or, the pre-incarnate Christ with them in the fire. All right, then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, but not close enough to die, and he declares, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. All right. And so thinking about this, so how does God save them? Why does God save them? What effect does this have on those who are watching? So God saves them they're in the furnace. They are surrounded by flames and the heat and everything, but they're not burned. The flame, they're somehow become unbound, whether the flames burn up the ropes, not clear. Why does God save them? Because it's a great witness that then the king's able to see that this happens. And if, again, the king and all the officials realize that God's a God to be able to do this, and so they know what to do. All right. Now, again, we normally think of this kind of just in that idea of Sunday school story. Here's what one of the first VeggieTales movies, Rack, Shack, and Benny. And for them, it's a lesson in handling peer pressure, because as he makes a giant chocolate bunny that everyone's supposed to eat and bow down to, and they refuse to do that. But there's more going on in that. But before we move on to more of that discussion, I want to talk also about what we'll hear as the sermon hymn, or heard as the sermon hymn, depending on when you're watching this, which is this song of the three young men that's in our hymnal, both in a more chant-like way, and then but we sing it with the kind of Caribbean, Jamaican tune. And so it's part of some additions to Daniel. So if you remember, so the Old Testament's written in Hebrew, but in the centuries before Jesus, because the Jews have been scattered so much, and there's a great colony of Jews living in Alexandria, and Alexander the Great has come through and conquered things, so everyone's speaking Greek. They decide they need to translate the Old Testament into, or what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, into Greek. And it's abbreviated LXX, because it's called the Septuagint, and abbreviated LXX because it was allegedly 70 or 72 elders, scholars that translate it in Alexandria. There's some, myths about it that they all go in and translate it themselves, and then miraculously all their translations are the same. Some things like that. But that's important then, because when the New Testament's written in Greek, that's what the disciples usually quote. They quote from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew, because they're working in Greek, so they keep it in Greek. But then that's where we get some of what's called the Apocrypha. And those books that are from within the intertestamental period. And among those are some additions to Daniel, to the book of Daniel. There's a story of Susanna. There's a story of Bel and the dragon, and Bel's Belshazzar, Daniel's name, and then this prayer of Azariah. Remember, that's Abednego. We know, if we're using his Babylonian name, we call him Abednego. And so the prayer of Azariah, and then this song of the three young men, which is allegedly what they sang in the fire furnace. And here's how Luther describes it. that here follow several pieces which we did not wish to translate and include in the prophet Daniel and in the book of Esther, because we get some other, there's some similar additions to Esther. We've uprooted such cornflowers because they do not appear in the Hebrew versions of Daniel and Esther, and yet to keep them from perishing, we have put them here in a kind of special little spice garden or flower bed, since much that is good is found in them. And so what we find with that song of the three young men, and it's kind of like Earth and All Stars, that it's all these things of creation praising God, and so Luther says, okay, it's a great hymn of praise. It's not on the same level of Scripture, but we can use it in worship, and so that's why it's in our hymnal. It's in some lectionary readings. There's parts of it that have been used for centuries in different things, and so that the general rule for the Apocrypha is that it's good and edifying, but not necessarily not on the same level of Scripture, because some of it is kind of old fan fiction sort of, but again, because it's not in the original Hebrew, and we haven't found it in the original Hebrew, even in some of the Dead Sea Scrolls and things, but it's in the Greek. We know they're later additions, and so they don't quite fit. All right. So what do we learn from the three young men? So one thing is, though, what are they doing? They're in this strange hostile land. We might think that then they should be actively resisting the change, this enemy culture. They shouldn't be participating in it at all. They should be working behind the scenes to, mess up the Babylonian army or mess up the government, forming a resistance or something so that they can fight back. But yet that's not what they do. And that's not what they're commanded to do. Jeremiah writes a letter to the exiles, and in it he writes this. He says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." And again, this is the whole group, because Daniel and the three young men are part of the first group that get brought into exile, but then everyone else does. So, what are they commanded to do while they're in Babylon? Build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so they may bear sons and daughters, and multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, do not let your prophets and your diviners who are among you deceive you, and do not listen to the dreams that they dream. For it is a lie that they are prophesying to you in my name. I did not send them, declares the Lord. And then we get into that, famous verse that gets used as encouragement. I saw it on graduation cards when I was looking at cards to give to the high school graduates, that kind of thing. That I have the plans for you, plans for welfare, not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. But again, this message goes to the people who are in exile in Babylon and aren't sure how to handle that. And so then the question comes to us: where should we draw the line in what's acceptable to fit in with our culture and what's unacceptable for Christians to do or participate in? And we'll have hopefully some good discussion on Sunday morning about this. If you have any thoughts about any of these questions, either put them in the comment section here on YouTube, or give me a call, shoot me an email or something, and we'll see what we can do and talk about. All right. So we just June was Pride Month, and so all sorts of that stuff was going on. So how do we navigate that as a Christian? What can we participate in as Christians without losing our witness? And there's questions about what to do at a family member's wedding. Do you take your what do you do with if there's a drag queen story time or drag brunch or something? Do you have to protest it? Can you just ignore it? Can you participate in it as a way to try and connect to the people that are there, who may not have such a good view of Christians or may have not interacted with Christians in a while? How do you navigate all of those issues? That's one thing we can talk and think about as we look at the example of these young men that, again, they changed their names. They work for the good of the government that's even hostile to them, but they don't change their diet, and they won't bow down and worship an idol. And of course, people will talk about the rainbow flags being an idol we can't bow down to. So again, some interesting thoughts and discussion over how do we handle this. Another thing that came up this week, for those of you who are politically inclined, Jim Remke, a seminary classmate of mine, I think it was a year or two older than me, LCMS pastor from Kenosha, Wisconsin, on Monday night gave one of the closing benedictions at the Republican National Convention. And so there's debate over whether, can we participate in such partisan activities or not? And then there was debate over the fact that he does that Trump impression of you're going to be so blessed after this, and gets Trump to laugh. Is that appropriate as we pray anywhere, let alone in a public space like that, or not? Or then there was pushback because after him there was a Sikh priestess gave some sort of blessing too, and Pastor Remke had said that if I'm doing this, I can't be I have to be the only one on stage because of the the LCMS views on unionism and syncretism, that our ancestors left Germany because we were going to be part of the unified Protestant church, and so forced to not ignore the differences between Lutherans and Reformed, and so avoiding worshiping with other people from other denominations, because it gives that sense of unionism, that idea that we all believe the same things when we don't, and then of course even bigger syncretism, worshiping with people of other religions, and taking those things in. So how do we think through those kind of political engagements, political things? A couple weeks ago when we looked at Naaman, Naaman tells Elisha after he's healed, look, I've got to do this thing, as part of my government duties as a general, as the right-hand man of the king, is I have to go to the temple with the king. He's going to kneel, and I'm going to have to kneel with him, and I'm going to have to help him down, help him up. My heart's not going to be in it now because I know who the real God is, but I'm going to have to do this. And Elisha says that's okay. Does that should he have stood up more? Should he have refused to do that at the cost of his job? And then should Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, should they have just gone along with it, bowed to the idol, even if their heart, but then knowing inside their heart wasn't in it, but the outward action was there, and that's something Christians would struggle with too. Once having to bow down to Caesar, which gets to, of course, that. When Jesus is getting trapped by the Herodians, they say, should you pay taxes or not? And knowing Jesus would get in trouble either way. And Jesus says, well, you give to Caesar what is Caesar's and what is God's. And so what are those, where do we draw those lines? What's Caesar's, what's God's? How do we go? Paul writing to the Romans in Romans chapter 13 says, rulers are not a terror to good conduct but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who's in authority? Then do what is good and you will receive his approval. And Paul's writing this about Nero, who uses Christians as torches And we'll execute Peter and Paul later on. So if how do we honor leaders that aren't Christian, aren't favorable to our understanding of Christianity, let alone even hostile, and yet we're still commanded to honor them. How does that work? And then Peter and other apostles are commanded by the Jewish authorities, don't stop talking about Jesus, and they say, well, no, we have to obey God rather than men. So what can we agree to? What do we obey? What don't we? And that's a thing for Christians to disagree about and discuss and figure out. And I think the third thing for us to, again, reflect as we look at how Daniel and the three friends dealt with being in Babylon. So again, we may not be thrown into the fiery furnace. However, like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we live in a culture that doesn't do things the way we as Christians know they should. We may not be eating different foods or bowing down to idols, but we're surrounded by things that draw us away from God. But just as God was with them in their strange culture, so God's with us. And we'll close with a prayer, because again, this story isn't in the normal lectionary, really, but it is it's included in the Easter Vigil service. So it's a big, long, 2-hour service that sort of coming back into vogue, with the idea that there's a series of 9 readings that go from creation to Easter and dealing with that. And we'll go from there. And so we'll close with this prayer. Okay? O God, your Son protected faithful Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace of the king. Grant us protection in our time of testing, that we would boldly confess your name, reject all false worship, and live and die in confidence, knowing that we are safe in your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you very much for listening and watching.